We're excited for our next talk, Payment Parity Perspectives, Women of Color Reshaping Financial Inclusion. Our moderator today is Raashi Saxena. She's a renowned public interest technologist, trainer and strategy consultant with Accessibility Lab, and carries a wealth of experience in open source technology, social impact, and practice, as well as holding several advisory positions. And I will hand over for her to introduce the rest of the panel.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I hope you all are doing really well. As you all know, my name is Raashi. I'm based out of Bangalore, India, and I'm the host for the panel on payment parities. Some of the aspects or the rationale behind us with this panel was to have conversations about how women have responded and integrated into the ILF ecosystem. I have very talented co-panelists here. I have Vikoka, who's been deeply involved, Xiaoji, who's also been deeply involved in the ILF ecosystem. We also have an ILF staff member to talk about some of the disparities that we've seen as women and how we could move ahead to go ahead and talk about it. I come from a point of me working on several global projects and the bureaucratic hurdles of getting paid on time, not necessarily from clients, but just the different ecosystem with the different transactions. Also looking at, I also come from a country which has revolutionized digital payments, but then we've also fallen so behind on the ageism factor of how do we navigate through older people getting it. I always have to assist my elders, which is something I don't mind doing, also from a social cultural perspective. But then it's also that a lot of them are scared to use and are shy to use so many of these aspects. The conversations that we're going to have are, we're all from different regions. So we're really excited to jump right in. And I'm going to start with Vic. And if you can introduce yourself and also talk a little bit about your connection to the ILF ecosystem. The floor is yours.
Hey everybody, I'm from Brooklyn, New York, so I'm gonna talk fast, I'm sorry. Hi everybody, my name is Victoria Coker. I'm the founder of Black WebFest. Black WebFest is a nonprofit organization that helps Black creators build sustainable careers by providing accessible programs and services. We started actually in 2017 having a festival. Since we've had the festival in New York, Atlanta, and London, which is really great. Some of our past alumni who screened at the festival have gone on to win BAFTAs and get awards at Sundance. Really cool, right? So we're kind of like a springboard for a lot of Black creatives, so I'm blessed in that way. And I'm also a past grantee of the Interledger Foundation. A while back, I got funding to actually support and help these Black creators learn how to monetize their work online. So we were able to give away about $20,000 to these creatives so they could learn, because oftentimes people know how to create stuff, but they don't know how to make money. So that's how I'm kind of connected to the ecosystem.
Thanks, Vic. Xiaoji, do you want to go next?
Hi everyone, this is Xiaoji. I grew up in China and I am an artist, community organizer and researcher based in Berlin. I got involved with the Interledger ecosystem because last year I was honored to be invited by Aiden to a panel. And this year I saw this art and culture grant coming up, and it's really working on the topic that I am passionate about. So I applied, and now I am a Future Money artist grantee and working with, let's say, the emotional dimensions of financial systems, which I would say, like, as an artist, I work with usually text, images, performances, and games, and that's also what I'm working on right now. And yeah, I work with the topics of migration, usually migration, border, technopolitics, and a lot about my art is about like building the infrastructure for radical imagination. And that's also, yeah, that's why I'm here. And yeah, nice to meet you all.
Hi, everyone. I am Julaire. I often refer to myself as Jules of many trades. I'm a children's picture book author. I write books empowering girls. I'm a blogger and podcaster. I enjoy telling people's story from around the world. And I am from the friendly city of Montego Bay in Jamaica. But for the purposes of this discussion, I am the program's outreach manager here at Interledger Foundation. And my connection to the ecosystem is that, but also I'm a member of an amazing team whose focus really is to design and manage grant programs to enable communities that are driving and pushing financial inclusion across the world. So yeah, that's my connection here.
Thank you. So to all of us, and as women of color, donning several hats, in 2 words, what are the experiences and perspectives that have shaped your understanding of financial inclusion?
Yeah, I guess I'll go first. One is racism. I guess I feel like everyone knows what racism is, so I'm not going to explain it. And if we need to talk about it, we can talk about it after. But aside from that, financial insecurity. I grew up in, and some people may see it a poor household. My mother actually was diagnosed as bipolar, so that impacted how she could actually get jobs and build her career out. Also, my father passed when I was really young, so she was also a single mom. And if you know anything, if you're from the United States, or maybe you've heard or you saw like a rapper or anybody talk about stuff like, we grew up on food stamps, and I've been on the government cheese line, so I know what it is to get financial assistance and not be able to afford things. But also that goes into possibly having the financial literacy that you need to succeed.
Thanks, Vic. Xiaoji?
I would say for me, the first thing would be infrastructure. And I know like that's kind of all we are talking about in Interledger right now. I'm talking also a different form of infrastructure, like the socialist feminism infrastructure that I grew up with, that in China we had a long-standing tradition of socialist feminism and different, like China actually, like probably a lot of people don't know, like we have a very high rate of double income families, and there's a lot of like, let's say top-down gender mainstreaming programs. And with all those programs being in place, there has been a lot of recent discussion because there has been waves of like grassroots feminist activism and the civil resistance movement going on in China. And we have been, there have been a lot of discussion about like, does those infrastructure actually support the grassroots and bottom-up movement, or does it actually counter them? So that is kind of one of the starting point about me reflecting on growing up in China and how is like my relationship with money, and how is like all the other women of color and all the Chinese women's relationship with money. That's like the starting point of my reflection about what does that infrastructure actually do? Does it actually do what it promises? So the second thing I have in mind is actually, let's say, emotions, which is also what I've already talked about. This is what I work with. So I think like, despite like so growing up in East Asia, like even though there is a high rate of double income families, there like women have, let's say, institutionally more access to money when it comes to statistics, but still, like the culture that I mentioned, it does not necessarily encourage you to talk about money. It does not like the traditional culture norm, and also in like different like rapid forms of development, there are all these feelings that I associate with money that like many of you have probably also experienced: the fear, the anxiety, the compulsion, like all those feelings and the trauma related to that. That is a main thing that I'm always thinking when I'm thinking about money, about like the relationship that I have with money, the lived experience related to how does that shape my own and many other psychological, like the psychological impact, the behavior pattern that are the long-lasting result of both the infrastructure and our, let's say, emotions related to money. And yeah.
Thanks, Xiaoji. Julaire?
Okay, thanks. So for me, it's not necessarily 2 words, but 2 concepts, financial literacy being one. I know the persons in this room, based on that exercise, that's not the case. But for me, I realize that many people are functioning with poor levels of financial literacy. I mean, for my experience back home in Jamaica. That's not something that's taught in schools. And, growing up in your families, you might not necessarily be taught, how the value of money and, how to, invest or whatever the case may be. And studies have also shown that, financial literacy is rather low where underrepresented minority women are concerned. So matters relating to personal finance, borrowing, debt management, which are critical to general financial wellness, that's not available to a lot of women, and it causes, a lot of consequential effects, high school dropouts, teenage pregnancies, broken homes, divorces, and, the rise of payday loans, those predatory lending institutions. So for me, I do believe that, having the knowledge and the understanding to make sound decision making around your personal finances is key. And my second concept would be economic empowerment. So you have the information, but what next? What do you do with the information? How do we connect people with opportunities so that they can, be better to manage their finances, accumulate wealth, and so forth?
Thanks. I have a mixed response. For me, I would look at financial inclusion as financial independence, and also giving me agency to be able to make decisions that don't cause me harm. Like you mentioned about domestic violence, I feel like a lot of personal relationships in the past were very patriarchal in nature, where men had a lot of controls on money, and a lot of women necessarily didn't move out of dire situations because of finances. So financial aspects was a huge aspect, and a lot of the patriarchal conversations we also hear about how the rise in divorce cases are much higher now because women have financial independence. Another one that I would also look at is literacy, more on digital literacy. The ability of you being able to take a loan or applying for a credit card. A lot of it has to do with also understanding the different aspects of how these things move, or having a basic understanding of how UPI moves. I don't think UPI is a very, I would say, successful model in India for micropayments, and I would also say that a lot of people don't understand the number of different interfaces that are there, or understand the security and privacy aspects, which is something that a lot of women have shied away from using because of those aspects. But personally, people in my own family have issues of whether you could recall payments, or how the information that is being used for your financial regulators. India also comes from a country which has a lot of spam calls and marketing calls. So we also understand that a lot of these banks are essentially using you as commodities to be able to sell whatever information they can to, how it goes about. So one of the other aspects was, maybe my question could go to Xiaoji, what does financial inclusion mean from you for someone who's migrated from China from a socialist perspective and moved to Europe? How has it been for you, and how is the ecosystem there?
I would say one of the major things that I'm really interested in, and that's also why I bring out the topic of infrastructure as well as emotion, is because there are many different forms of marginalization that are very often people who are marginalized at different aspects of life are being pitted against each other. People would try to pit immigrants against local workers. People would try to pit women searching for access against other people of color searching for access. I think migrating to Europe, when in the first 2 years I migrated to Europe, 2015, 2016, when the Syrian communities just come in. And I was working a lot with the local communities. I was working in this cafe called Frauen Cafe, in German it's a women's cafe, basically to bring in refugees women and also female volunteers together. There's a weird German term Flinter, so queer and women, yeah. So when we were working that cafe, so what we basically do is every week we have this let's say a meeting together. We eat some snacks and like have some coffee, nice conversation, but most importantly for the women to ask some questions and ask for help about bureaucracy, and also if like there is any other aspect of like that they really need help from the female volunteer that they do not feel comfortable bringing in their own communities or do not feel comfortable in the bigger like NGO settings. So in those organizations, when I was working with them, something that really resonated with me is that how often the questions of money and finance and labor market access comes up, because it's really a daring question for them, and also it's a question that they do not often get supported, both from their own community setting and also from like different sort of like institutions. And what I find interesting, and also like what I'm currently working with, is like how I think financial exclusion and this lasting result of being historically excluded, this intersectional marginalization, is something that connects us all. It's something that, despite what forms of marginalization that you have experienced, is something that echo with each other and resonate with each other. Yeah.
Thanks, Xiaoji. Vic, you were talking about the marginalization that you've seen as a black woman and the situation with black women. I could also relate where we were having a similar discussion about how you mentioned that just 1% of black women black women entrepreneurs have received funding in the ecosystem, which is not too far away from the global stats. I believe most VCs that offer funding to women entrepreneurs remains under 10%, which is quite an alarming rate, and which also begs me to ask, what can we do, and what have you seen?
Yeah, so we all talked before this panel, obviously. But it was actually black founders as a whole only get 1%. So black women actually get less than that. I forget what it is. I feel like it's like 0.03, but don't quote me on that. So that's super crazy. And one of the things that just happened recently, I think it's great when we talk about our own personal experiences. But oftentimes people are like, yeah, that's just you. But when you say metrics and numbers, that means something to people. People are like, oh, numbers don't lie. People do. So I just want to give you a few more things that are happening in the ecosystem right now. So a lot of people may have heard that in America they rolled back affirmative action regarding institutions, which is annoying. I believe in affirmative action, whatever. But that same guy who actually led the charge for rolling that back, he actually started targeting black entrepreneurs and organizations that fund those black women entrepreneurs. Black women, if you didn't know, in America, we actually are the fastest growing, segmentation or whatever, demographic in the United States. So it's a real personal, problem. One of the funds, everyone knows the Cosby Show, right? Even though Cosby is canceled, we all know Rudy, right? So her real name is Keisha Knight Pullman. She actually started a fund with some other women called the Fearless Fund. That fund got a whole bunch of money from different organizations, including MasterCard. And then that guy actually attacked the organization, made sure that everything got stalled in terms of their funding. They were giving away $25,000 grants to women of color, black women specifically, and now the funding that these women were waiting on to possibly pay for their businesses to evolve now is stalled in the system, and he's just fighting the fight. And then after he did that, you might say, oh, that's just a singularity. He's not really trying to attack black women and women of color. Nah, he is. Because then after that, he went after Hello Alice, if you ever heard of Hello Alice. It's actually owned by Latinx women, and I forget who her co-founder is, but she actually is working with the NAACP and Progressive, the insurance company, and they gave them funding, and he targeted them and is suing Progressive as well. So he's making sure that maybe it might affect black women now, but then it affects Latinx women next, and then Indian women, and then Asian women. He doesn't really care, and it's super crazy, and sometimes we think like it's not impacting us now, so let's not worry about it, but I would ask all of you to kind of consider and think about it and pay attention to the headlines, because it might seem small now, but it's going to be bigger later.
Thanks, Vic. Julaire, what are some of the initiatives that the ILP ecosystem is looking to balance these aspects or looking at bridging these barriers? Would you like to talk about them?
Okay, thanks, Raashi. Okay, so when we talk about Interledger Foundation, you know that our principles and our core values are set around diversity, inclusion, equity, and our programs are designed to enable financial access and inclusion. And whilst our programs don't necessarily target females, it's not a female grant or a woman in tech grant or a woman in business grant. Our grants are open and inclusive. And so both ladies here would have benefited from different grant programs or grant initiatives. So that's pretty much what we do. Also, our focus is really about reaching various communities, and what we do is we partner with persons who are also in those communities through our ambassadorship program to kind of understand what the issues are in those communities so we can help to design programs that people can benefit from. So today we've had 5 ambassadors that are female. 2 are actually now on staff at Interledger. And you know, one of them, Lawil, I think she left. Lawil would have worked with us when we had our ILP-enabled financial services grant, and what she did, she coordinated a grant writing workshop in East Africa, and we got 8 grant proposals from that effort, 4 of which were successful, which I am seeing Crypto Savannah in here, which is one of the recipients. So that's, you know, how we work to make change and effect. And we also have Erica Hargreave. I'm sure most of you would have met Erica, and she also have a micro travel grant. So she brings persons from the various indigenous communities to this summit so that they can be exposed to what we do, the grant programs that we have. And of course, events such as this, you know, this conversation, the themes surrounding the summit were intentional. You know, we wanted gender discussions. We wanted, you know, a discussion around what is happening in the global south. So this is how we play our part. And of course, we are open to your suggestions, you know, on how we can enhance our grant programs or be more targeted.
Thanks, Julaire. And also from my other question to the panelists was, what are the interesting aspects that we've seen within the ecosystem that look at fostering financial inclusion that could benefit from the ILP ecosystem? What are some of the conversations we should get? Are there any initiatives that you've come across? And I'd also like to open it up to the audience if there are any initiatives that you all have come across that could be interesting or that you all have worked on, you'll have come across that could be interesting to the ILP community. But I'll first open it up to our panelists. Vic, you want to go first?
I gotta think about that one. I mean, I think there's tons of people doing great things. Like, that's the hard part, is there's so many people who are doing things focused on women. But I'm not sure exactly where that would fall in line. So let me think about it first, though.
Xiaoji?
I mean, for me, of course, I'm gonna talk about the future money cohort. I think like it's like, except for the like institutional and technological aspect of financial inclusion, I think the topic of finance is as much of an institutional and technological question as much of an emotional and imaginative question. And I'm, of course, very appreciative that I got this opportunity to work with different artists that work with, let's say, fostering different forms of imaginaries related to money and also related to exclusion and inclusion as a topic. Another thing that maybe this is not like a specific initiative, but something that I find quite important is that, especially like we also talk about like, let's say like payment parities and a lot of work that women usually perform, like care labor, emotional labor, are not paid. And if those type of labor are counted, we would create like such a big amount of value, like a financial value that that completely like change the way how economy works right now. And so for me, it's always very important that I work in an environment and I am in a community where care work and emotional labor are actually valued and understood and discussed. And I think that's something that I actually experience at the Interledger ecosystem. And yeah.
The Interledger community is, you have something to say?
I was going to let you go.
No, so the Interledger community does, I think it's a very community-centric aspect. So I think for someone who is so drawn to open source systems, I enjoy how you can have a community that you can fall back on any initiative that you want to make. And you can also be bold with risk-taking, which is something that a lot of women, and I've also seen this in the Indian ecosystem, even from something as basic as having a credit card, borrowing money is something that women as socially and culturally are very, very shy from doing, borrowing money or lending money or taking loans, even in businesses. And maybe that doesn't necessarily come from things not being available in the ecosystem. I think my government in India has done a lot to do that, but maybe also getting exposure to the different schemes that are available for women to be able to do this is a huge gap.
Yeah, I wanted to add. I think exactly what I was talking about is the problem needs to be a solution, but I think the foundation is already doing a lot of that work. Is giving funding, giving grants to promising projects and creatives, because that's so important. Like, it's needed. I just said the numbers, so right, you need more money.
To add to that?
I'm really interested to hear what everybody would say, because it would sound like I'm critiquing myself, or so I'm really interested to hear the feedback from others.
Any cool projects out there or things you think would be cool?
Yeah, I work sometimes with an organization called Data for Black Lives. They're a US-based, Black women-led organization. And they do a lot of work on abolition, on privacy, on security, on data ownership. And one of their recent initiatives, the founder, Xiaoji, just spoke at the White House on their initiative to abolish FICO, which, if you're not familiar, is the Fair Isaac Corporation. It's like a credit monitoring agency. It's actually not an agency, it's like a private organization. And if you care about opacity, even if you don't agree with the idea of abolishing that organization, there is a lot of work to be done as far as opacity, or as far as transparency, the opposite, because they do have these algorithms that are discriminatory and we don't really know what they're doing on their end. And also if you are concerned about surveillance states and that sort of discriminatory practice, I definitely encourage you to get involved. If you want to reach out to me after this, I'm pretty close with them, so I can put you in touch if you have initiatives that you'd like to get involved in.
So we just came from a session downstairs that helped us do a little exercise about scenarios of women from the rural areas. So they don't have bank accounts, of course, because the culture doesn't, many of them don't have accounts, so the husband has to give her money. So when the husband gives her money, she takes off a small percentage of the money and takes it to what we call a circle. The Luganda word is nigina. I don't know how to say it in English. But a group of women come together and they keep putting money in this pool. And at the end of the month, one of them gets the money.
Oh, that's partner draw, I'm not sure, yeah.
Something like that.
It's like a susu.
The cash rounds, yes. Something called cash rounds. And so they do this with the money. They've saved off money that's supposed to be buying something in the house, supplies, daily supplies. And that's the way they are learning to save, and they're able to lend to each other, have small interests, of course, because that's about $2 to $3. And so you're saving this money and being able to just share it amongst yourselves as women. I think if we came up with a small system that helps them, with interests, or even teach them how to do this better, I think they can get so much more from just that space as women, because if we go into the education, you're going to be fighting culture. If you're going to ask them to actually go and start working, you're going to start fighting with the men, and the communities may not receive you very well. However, if you try to do some research around how is this done, how do we make it better, and how do we make it, those numbers would be very important.
My organization does that research. So we work I work for the Center for Financial Inclusion, and that's basically what we do. We look at different models, we look at what works, we look at digital innovation. So some of the savings groups have actually been digitized. Senegal, for instance, has an app called Ma Tontine, and part of that is teaching consumers how to use the app to save, regularly. So it's like a digitized Sako or a digitized Susu. But there is data on that.
So maybe mainstreaming gender roles when it comes to these finance aspects. I just pulled up a stat from one of the Indian regulators, SEBI, the Securities and Exchange Board of India, that says that only 23% of Indian women have knowledge of financial planning and investments. And there seems to be a gap in terms of financial access to these services, and a bigger gap on digital financial services. And from a lot of research that you've also done, I've also seen that women in these gender mainstream roles, it might be easier if you have a woman helping these women set up accounts, or a female representative to walk you through all of these aspects. There would be a higher level of trust, because you're also looking at social and cultural barriers. You might not have mobility, you might not be used to talking to strangers online. So yeah, breaking those barriers would be mainstreaming gender. Xiaoji, what would you look at defining? How would you define a fair and inclusive financial service? How would you imagine it?
I think actually a lot of it, like you've already mentioned. I think one thing would be that the infrastructure is, of course, really, really important. And like policy-wise, like to have a gender mainstreaming approach, to have more like gender-sensitive work related to financial inclusion for women of color. But on the other hand, also to still like bring in people from different perspectives, different lived experiences, to have like more, let's say, context on the cultural dynamics and historical narratives related to what kind of people are historically marginalized and what kind of relationship they have with money as a result, what kind of relationship they have with institutions. So financial inclusion for me is not a state, but it should be an active process. And I think that's the kind of process that to see it as a process itself help to bring a more fair and inclusive future related to financial services.
No, definitely. It can't be a one-off training where you have financial inclusion training, where you have one of these banks who come up with these campaigns and schemes and say, hey, we're doing a financial inclusion training. It can't be a one-off thing. It has to be, it might also be required as a service for the penetration of a lot of these services and products, and also adoption of them. We have an audience question. Please go ahead. A comment.
It's not so much a question as much as it is an aha moment. And when you said the word relationship, that's worth unpacking. Because when you think about relationships, there are people that come into relationships with trauma, baggage, that impacts how they show up in their relationships. And it's the same as far as how I show up in my relationship that I have with money, how I trust money. And of course, money is something that can't give anything back to me, but I mean, insofar as how I see it and how I feel about it, that matters. And it influences how much I may want to learn or invest my time and prioritize in learning more and investing more in my relationship with the money. And then it comes down to, if I do have a dysfunctional experience with money, then how do I get healed? Yeah, so I can get to that next point as to where I want to learn more, engage more, act, and be a more active actor in the ecosystem. There's a whole lot that can be unpacked there. But I mean, I wanted to say that because when you said relationship, I was like, you know what? Yeah, it is relationship, and I think that it also, it also brings to mind to me that the reality is, and I am someone that I'm second generation, from college, college educated. My parents grew up in the Jim Crow South, one Alabama, one Louisiana. I'm like Beyonce, daddy Alabama, mama Louisiana. But both of them knew that they wanted something different, even though one was sharecropper and one just Poe. So I think, but they decided that they want something different, and they decided to do something different. And then with the word legacy, they decided to build upon the legacy that they started and make sure that they were intentional in sharing that information with us. So I come in with a more healthy relationship, but I can see how with others who have the access to the same information with the internet, the information is out there. And I think that the question becomes, how do we balance the recognition that there are real present barriers with the fact that, but yeah, we do have access to information too. So how do we bridge that gap?
So one of the conversations I've been having with a lot of people, and even your piece says it, financial trauma. We've been, something that we're not talking about enough. This is a tech conference, right, mostly, right? So it's kind of hard to talk about, like, okay, people need therapy and stuff. It ain't that type of woo-woo type of thing, but that's where we need to be possibly if we're trying to make financial inclusion real. We need those workshops. There's real people who are practitioners who are doing financial trauma workshops, right? And so people may need to go to those places or build those or create those opportunities so that people can actually go through their feelings, whatever that is. If that's mistrust against their government or financial institutions, if they have those opportunities, then they can move to the next step possibly, right? But I think that's needed. And sometimes we're like, no, we're gonna solve it with tech, or we're gonna solve it with more money or whatever. But I definitely think we need to also apply that to it as well.
Yeah, thank you very much for your insight. This is exactly actually what we are trying to talk about here. Like kind of like our emotional dynamics related to it, and like our very personal relationship, like this ever-evolving process. Like, and sometimes it's not all like happy and romancing relation. There's also the inherent like violent nature of it because of the system we live in. So thank you very much for that insight.
Hi, sorry. I just wanted to piggyback off what Erin said as someone who comes from a single parent, upbringing. But the interesting thing was that my grandparents from Jim Crow, North Carolina, came to New York, and most of my family members all are college educated. But growing up, I had no financial literacy. I had a mother who worked a 9 to 5, and my relationship with money has been poor. And at the age I am now, I won't say how old I am, but at my age, I'm learning. And it's never too late to learn, but the information is available. It's there. It's just I now have to take the time to problem solve it, because before I know it, retirement will be around the corner, and that's my biggest fear. Like, okay, how am I going to take care of myself when I'm 65, when I'm 70? Who's going to be here to take care of me? Because the reality is that I have to make sure that I have a foundation. And sometimes I wish that my mom was able to teach me that. And the crazy part is my mother worked for the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. So she worked in ACH funds transfers for 25 years. But she didn't have the time to properly teach her girls how to manage money. So we're trying now, and we're attempting to get better at it. And my entire family, like, we're working together as a whole to problem solve all these things now, because we're getting older. And I have a senior citizen parent, so how is this set up for her? I mean, she's lucky. She's got 2 pensions and all this stuff, but where will I be when I'm retirement? What will my pension look like? Will there be a pension? will that exist? So those are the barriers that I'm coming up in front of now and trying to figure it out now before it's too late.
So I see a conversation around trust, trust in the systems and the ecosystem, and another conversation that I also see is changing the language. We talk about access to resources, but also changing the language of how these conversations happen. I mean, especially in India, I'm actually very interested to see how so many fintech, I don't want to say influencers, but there are some very interesting personalities that also critique and talk about how women can have more agency in their money. I think Salt is a really good example. They're a fintech startup in India that is doing some very good conversations and making guides on women to have more financial literacy. But of course, this is in the urban world. And things are different in the rural world. I know we are running short of time, but I also wanted to check with our panelists and then move on to questions and comments. How can the ILP system and the ecosystem be help, and what is the solution? What would you recommend based on the experiences that you all have? Xiaoji?
Oh. I feel like I've already talked about my solution, so I'm just gonna take this chance to say it's really, really great that we have actually a space like this to have those really intimate and but also extremely relevant, really personal things about our life, but that are also relevant to the system we live in. So thank you very much for having this space and be willing to share with us all these stories. Thank you.
Okay, I think for me, from a ILF standpoint, is about being more strategic with our partnerships and how we engage with the communities. So I know Jayshree mentioned working, based on what the Center for Financial Inclusion is doing. They're reaching more people, having more touch points, and now we have a collaboration with them, to further that work and that action. We're also partnering with other entities as well. We have expanded our ambassadorship program, not just not focusing only on community, but also some themes, whether it's research, open source, and other areas as well. So it's being more intentional and strategic going forward.
Makes sense. To me, I love solutions, solution-based, and I like immediate, right? To me, I would ask everybody in the room if you have a connection, if you have access, and I think they mentioned that earlier today too. It's like your network, it's about how many people you connect people to. Today, at least talk to one person. To me, I would ask, one woman of color would be great. But if not that, just one person where you can kind of support or connect them, because I think sometimes we're in these spaces and we don't want to talk and we could be cliquey, but if you can kind of connect one person or talk to one person and see what they're working on and how you can support, that could be amazing.
And also, it's also about building relationships. I mean, we're at the ILF Summit, we're in an intimate setting. So yes, we would also urge everyone to have more conversations, build more relationships. And I'm not sure if maybe we have time for one or two questions. And if we can raise questions. And I know that Jayshree had a comment, but give it up.
No, go ahead.
It's a bit more of a comment than anything, but something that I've been hearing a lot is about representation and needing more representation. So one, for role models. So when you can see yourself in other people, you can aspire and you can see what you are building towards. So I think that's really important. But the other thing was when you was talking about people being pulled down by people in power. So just that, the constant fight to get people into positions of power so that they're not tearing down those that don't look like them or sound like them or act like them. So yeah, if anyone's got any ideas about that, because we're lacking massively in women of colour in those power positions.
Well, it's two comments really. One is, what Erin said and what Aisha said really triggered, it brought back some work that we'd done a few years ago when I was working in CGAP, which is we looked at national level surveys, financial access surveys. Most of them start collecting data from the age of 15. You find that the difference in financial services or usage and access of financial services is actually very low at the age of 15 between teenage boys and girls.
And then at 18, the gap suddenly increases. And then as you get older and older, obviously the gap is like significantly high. And so that brings to mind two things. One is that we really need to work with younger people, because that's, a lot of this tends to be intergenerational. Your financial behaviors are carried forward, you're not taught right, and that influences what happens later in life. But also women don't invest enough in their old age. And that's a big gap that we need to start thinking about and addressing much earlier. And we spoke about the pension gap, which is because you take maternity leave, you automatically earn less or will have less than a man at much later in life. And because we're at a tech conference, I think this is important to say, because we held an event last year, which is how I met Vineil and Ginny, and was brought in touch with the ILF network, where we spoke about how tech is also exposing people to risks, cybersecurity risks. And anybody that's been hacked, even if it's your email that's been hacked, it's extremely invasive. And if you're a first-time user, or if you're somebody, there is cyber PTSD, and nobody, just like financial trauma, nobody's talking about cyber PTSD. And that's something that we need to talk about.
Thanks, Jayshree. I think that's my mom's biggest concern. My mom always had a concern of me not putting up a profile picture on Facebook for a long time because it would get morphed, and now you have deepfakes. Are there any other comments, questions?
Yeah, I also kind of had an aha moment from an engineering perspective, where a lot of the issues, and Raashi, I think you mentioned this at the beginning of the talk, where women of color tend to wear like a lot of hats. And I think one of the recurring themes of the discussions that we've been having is the amount of time that people have to take care of their finances and to learn about personal finance. And so for engineers and technologists that are building within this ecosystem, I just thought that it would be important to mention that we should focus as much as possible on respecting users' time. And breaking down the amount of barriers that even if it's like a terms and conditions, how much can you simplify that? There's a lot of work being done, especially at Tiger Beetle, to optimize transaction speeds. So if you're looking for anything to help out with, and you may not be directly related to some of the struggles that we've been talking about, that at least is like a best practice that can help.
We have time for maybe one question, and then we'll wrap up. We wouldn't want to miss the big announcement, so I want to be cognizant of time. But if we don't have any other questions, thank you so much for the riveting discussion. Thank you so much for everything. So we would say bye for now, but I know that we can have these discussions more outside this panel. Thank you so much for attending. Have a great evening.